have an RFID or radio identification device in the actual container, in the cart or bin, and they monitor the amount of recycling that's picked up and keep that information, and people are able to gain points and earn credit for certain things, gift cards and so forth.
So that would, if that was being applied to trash, there would be a similar kind of rewards or incentives for reducing the amount of the weight of your trash. Would that be the idea?
As an example, correct, yeah.
Okay. And it sounds like, much like the more advanced pay-as-you-throw alternatives, it's pretty dependent on having RFID and the ability to weigh on location as you pick things up.
Correct. Those options would require most of the trash carts or all the trash carts to have these RFID systems.
So when we look at the track that's considering an alternate system, we know the huge potential financial benefit of it, but there are a lot of the other factors that led us into looking into this, and a lot of it has to do with wanting to increase recycling and reduce waste production in our community. And so it's possible that if we had a really effective pay-as-you-throw system, that we could get a lot of the way to that without necessarily having to have a city contract. But it's the impression that I got from working on the working group is that most of the haulers in the city don't have the technology to be able to do that. But let me ask the question, I guess from a legal standpoint, it would be to Alan. Would we have the ability now or in the future to have our ordinance mandate that haulers would have to have the ability to track and weigh and bill on a per pound basis for trash pickup, so that there really was, I mean, they could still compete on rates, but it really would have to be based very strongly on exactly how much volume of trash they're throwing away or how much weight of trash they're throwing away.
Mayor and Council, my first plus reaction to that would be, I don't know why you couldn't. If you want to do it, if you want to modify your ordinance to make that a requirement for trash haulers generally in the city.
It might not be terribly popular, because for a lot of haulers it would mean requiring them to buy new equipment and new bins and install them and have all the operations to be able to monitor that and bill it accordingly. But it would leapfrog us ahead of things that were kind of long-term goals of the organized collection idea. I also had a question about the reducing the number of licensees, and I think that I found the answer in the Lakeville ordinances. It seems like the idea would be that when Lakeville introduced that ordinance, and when we hear from the haulers and their representatives, we can get more details on this, but it sounded like they grandfathered in all the existing ones and then just relied on attrition to decline down to the level of 6. And so I just then make the observation that if we did start to actually enforce the ordinance before there were incremental penalties, and began by making it clear that we would begin enforcing the existing ordinance, which means canceling your license if you violate it, that would certainly accelerate that process if we did decide to go down that path. Or it might, unless there was a very quick round of compliance with all of the terms of the existing ordinance.
The published rates, see, originally we talked about back in 1997, I think it was, where the published rates are supposed to be in the Maplewood newsletter. And today, with between the newsletter and the internet, there's no reason why people can't check the published rates and see if they get charged accordingly or not. So I don't think that should be a problem to monitor it that way.
I think the problem, Marv, is that at least I believe, you can correct me if you're wrong, or if I'm wrong.
I like that line.
That was some kind of Freudian thing. But the idea was that the haulers would publish the rates that they would actually charge people. And so I see it as not a failure on communicating it or the public looking at it. I see it as a failure on the hauler's parts of reporting one rate and then charging other rates. And so we, even if they're charging less to somebody than what they report, they're still not doing what it is that the intention was, and that still to everyone who's not then getting that rate is a disservice to those citizens.
Well, you have the same thing with Comcast. They advertise a 6-month special to get you on as a customer, and then if you don't call back in 6 months, your rates will go up. But I think the idea is that
same, Marv.
Well, at any rate, the idea is that I think what happened is that we weren't following through as a city, making sure keeping that information accurate. And then if we follow through as a city and keep the published rates in the newsletter every month, keep it posted on the internet, the people have the ability to check and see if they are getting charged the rates that they are advertised.
I wouldn't argue that we could do a better job of posting it, but they are on the internet, and they're only required to submit them once a year, and so they shouldn't change during that year.
Well, maybe we should require to be updated more often.
A follow-up on that, John?
I pushed that button instead of that button, sorry.
Yeah.
So the current ordinance does require them to update it anytime that they change the rates, but as we found out earlier in the process, this year was the first time in staff's memory that a hauler ever actually did a during the year update to the rates. And I think that although certainly they've been publicized, the feedback that I've gotten from people suggests that a lot of them were not aware of what the official rates were. And the other factor is that, as we discussed during this process, a lot of haulers have additional charges that they introduce and modify at will that don't necessarily have any kind of objective relationship to what's going on. For instance, fuel surcharges that increase after fuel prices have declined. And those are not part of the current reporting scheme. And so if we want to have a reporting scheme that actually tells our residents what they should be paying, I think that at a minimum it should be everything except taxes, and that then you should be able to calculate what the taxes should be and see the bottom line on your bill without having to do a whole lot of independent research into understanding just what are these strange abbreviations and unknown things on your bill. I think it's currently, and some haulers are much clearer than others, so it's not necessarily true of everybody, but the difference in what people are being charged is, as we've discussed at length, widespread.
Kathy?
On page 6, which has to do with NSWMA conversation, this kind of plays the conversation we were just having, but it sounds nice to say that we would have a city-monitored web-based system where we publish the reported rates and then residents can actually get in and share their own rates, but that sounds nicer than it turns out to be, and it still get into the whole thing where, fine, if that's what you do and want to do, hooray for you, but if you're 85 and living alone in your house, or you're disabled or whatever, it puts the onus back on you to either pay the higher rate or have somebody else do the homework for you, whatever it is. It keeps pulling it back to, well, if you have the time and the desire to play games with these different companies, you can come out on top. And my reaction to that is, and kind of to Marv's point about cable TV, part of the reason we're looking at this to begin with is cable TV is not about a health, safety, and welfare issue that we need to be concerned about, but trash not being properly picked up or people having to pay through the nose to get it picked up is. It's more of a public health issue than cable TV will ever be, hopefully. And I understand that the idea of limiting the trash haulers, again, sounds good, but it is, if you do it the route that Lakeville did, it could be a long time before it's realized. And I guess the law of averages says if we had a limit of 6 haulers instead of 9 or whatever we have on a revolving basis, that would cut down the averages to say that I might only have 4 on my street instead of 6. But it does not really speak to one of the reasons we were looking at this was trying to get things done in district-type fashion where you had 1 truck or possibly 2. So I don't know how that, I mean, I know it's an attempt, but it just doesn't seem to me that it fulfills part of the reason we were looking at this. And I was kind of hoping that there'd be more than 2 points. And we only got 2. So-called transparency of rates and the limited number of licenses. And that's not really addressing the issues we were talking about up top. And I also have a question for, I don't know if it's for staff or for haulers, how does one monitor the route maps? I mean, you look at it and you say, nice route map, or where is your route map, or what does that mean?
I would guess that you'd have to have somebody go out and see if they're showing up where they're supposed to be right away in the morning, because that's the key part, because they presumably would be on the least structurally sound streets early in their route. I just don't have any pronunciation tonight. So that, Sean, do you think that would be much different? You'd have to get out and see if for sure if they're starting where they're supposed to start?
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Juniman, the ordinance requires the haulers to submit a route map every year, which we have not been requiring, but that route map would allow the city to work with the haulers to direct them to the areas, correct, that are
Weakest.
early on when the trash truck is lightest. And then, yeah, I guess going out and monitoring that as well. So those 2 items, actually taking in the route map, working with them, and then monitoring that.
Thank you.
Mr. Lannis.
Just one thing that I would say, or 2 things. One, to say, as you did, Mr. Mayor, that the city could, with the proper resources, do a better job of its enforcement of its codes, and I think is a fair assessment. But to blame somehow the city or say that the staff somehow fell asleep at the wheel, I think is just kind of irresponsible. And I would say that it's like saying to a parent, well, you told your kids the rules, you expect them to follow the rules, and when they break them, you call the parent crappy. And I don't think that's fair. That we set the rules, the haulers knew the rules, and understand the codes and the guidelines and the expectations, and it's like we gave them a long leash, and in some cases, some of them took as much advantage of that opportunity as they could. And that's an unfair thing to say that somehow the staff could have done a better job to prevent that. I think the other piece that I would question is that I do believe that there was a number of items that we were hoping to achieve through this discussion and through this process, and certainly price was one of them. I get that. I do understand that there were other things like environmental impacts and benefits to the city and creating some awareness to better services and pricing and rolling in all the other things that we've been asking through this whole process. So I get it. Price is certainly one of them. I do. But, the discussion for me was a broader thing, and it wasn't until all that information came back that we could, make that final assessment. So as part of I won't even go to the RFP piece, but so I would say that I do believe, the price rates are an issue, and I do think we can do better there. But I do think that we should still have an open mind to all the other benefits that we've laid out through this process.
So, Mr. Cantrud, in reviewing this, and I'm trying to go back in my mind and kind of think about the things that we were trying to accomplish if we were to organize. And so cost was the first one, and it sounds like one way or the other we probably could put together a better way to make sure the citizens are informed of the rates. But my question, because one of the things that we were throwing out here as a possibility was some incremental fine things. I mean, if indeed we're saying that we want our citizens to all know that they're all paying the same amount, and so if they look at our published list, they can pick out who's ever cheapest if that's what's important to them, and just call the cheapest, and they know they're going to be getting the cheapest price. And so if we were to find then through the kind of website thing that somebody's getting charged incorrectly, could we attach a fine to that?
Mayor and Council, I think you would bring them back before you under the auspices of your licensing authority, much like you do with a liquor license holder or tobacco license holder. Make them accountable for it. I mean, maybe there's an explanation, a chance to defend themselves, and if it's just, hey, we screwed up, much like your discussion with anyone that comes in on a violation on one of your other licensed activities in the city, and say, well, that's too bad, and here's your fine, and hopefully you don't do it again.
Okay. And would we be able to, under a municipal waste ordinance, indicate the type of service that has to be provided by someone who's going to be licensed in our city?
Mayor and Council, I would say certainly within reason. You can make minimum requirements as far as equipment, I think, goes. You'd have to be a little more specific before I could.
Well, so
answer.
I'm thinking, you know, we want to have this range. We want to have at least the 3 different main size containers. We want to have, you have to offer a yard waste program. You have to order or offer a bulky pickup, electronics. You know, these are the services that you need to provide if you're going to be licensed in our city.
I don't see any of those as being unreasonable.
Okay. And you already mentioned to some degree equipment. I mean, I was noticing that we had some type of minimum truck equipment requirements before, and also in the Lakeville ordinance. I mean, they practically say nothing, other than you have to have a truck that loads garbage, basically. But so I'm assuming that we'd be able to require a certain level of equipment be had.
Put it this way, I'd be comfortable with it, and we would know very quickly if it was going to get challenged in court what the challenge would actually be. So
Yeah.
if you wanted to go that route, I would say we should. I don't see why you couldn't do that, because you're defining, you know, what it's going to take to do the service and what kind of service you expect. That's the law. If you don't want to do that, choose not to be licensed and do trash hauling here. So if it's unduly burdensome, they'll certainly sue and say that you don't have the authority to do it, et cetera, et cetera. But, you know, it is a government obligation, and you can set limits.
So then I think my last question would be, in an ordinance, could we set up, I'm going to say probably the same daily zones we have now, and then in our licensing, only allow 2 licenses per area? So potentially that would give us 10 licenses for the city, but they'd be for sections of the city.
Again, Mayor and Council, I'll say I don't see why you couldn't. I'm just going through my mind of what the objections might be to setting it up that way with districts or what have you. And if you choose to be licensed in a certain district, there you go, and this is the day you have to do it. I think if you're going to allow a hauler to be in a zone, I think you'd have to allow all of the haulers to go for all the zones too. But, you know, if that's the way you want to set up the licensing scheme, I don't see why you couldn't.
No, I'm just trying to think of in an ordinance how we could, you know, achieve some of the objectives that we set out to achieve.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, certainly one of them, big one of them, was to have fewer trucks traveling on the streets.
Certainly, I think a lot of your goals could be managed through some sort of change in the ordinance. I mean, that's one of the considerations that you have to make.
I presume in the route map process, I was working out in Roseville the other day, and working on a street that was a loop street. I counted 7 different trash vehicles that went around it, but I have to admit that 3 of them were the same truck. It would go down, it backed up, it went down again, went around, came around the other way, backed up. I mean, this was all, I don't know what he was doing, but he spent a lot of time there. And so I mean, in the route map part of it, I also noticed, in another time I was out, that truck backed out in another city, backed like 500 or 600 feet down a dead-end street. And so we could, in a route map, say you can't do that kind of stuff. So. All right. Kathy?
I like where that conversation was going, but I do believe that we cannot just say, well, hey, we can just take what we wanted in a contract and put it in an ordinance. It doesn't work that way, because the ordinance will hit the too restrictive line far ahead of where the contract would. Because in a contract, you're negotiating with someone to do the service as you're defining it. An ordinance has reasonable levels expected. And so, while it sounds like a nice idea, I wish we could, and there's a possibility of looking at it and structuring it that way. But I do think there's a caution to be had that you do tread, and there are some organizations who shall remain nameless who would love to take on something like this. What the hell, it's only another mail campaign. I just think we need to decide how we want to do this and then do what makes that happen most efficiently and best to suit our whole goal to begin with. And I don't even know which one that is at this point, but I'm just saying we can't just say, well, then we'll just build it into the ordinance and they'll take care of that, because it won't. It's a step far beyond where we are now. But it isn't the same thing in a different dress. A pig with a purple dress is still a pig. Even if you put a green dress on it, it's still a pig. So, you can't just say, well, let's just put a new dress on, it'll look better. We have to decide what our direction is and how we want to get there.
You're not going to touch that pig comment, are you?
No, I'm not going to touch the big comment, but just to counterpoint type of thing, I believe that if we were to get to the end of our current 90-day period and had no plan that we've had discussed to that point that we found to be adequate, that then the state statute allows us to impose a system of our choosing. And so I'm thinking that we aren't necessarily limited to just an ordinance. I mean, we would still be organizing trash hauling, but we'd be basing it more off of our current ordinance language than off of the contractual RFP type of language. And so I would think that we would be covered in that type of situation. John?
Well, Mr. Mayor, you just made the point that I was going to bring up after your original comments about the licensing 2 haulers per zone idea, which was that this organized collection statute is a very strange animal, and it could well be interpreted to allow that, because it says that, when it has the beginning that defines how or what an organized system is, it lists a number of different ways that it can be organized, including franchising and licensing. And so, and I don't know the technical terms of if we could set up a franchise or 2 franchises per pickup district or something like that. But it seems like that would be a method of organization that could be considered or implemented somehow. It would require a heck of a lot of work because we haven't gone down that path yet. To its favor, we've certainly heard from a lot of people that are very loyal to a particular hauler, and their fundamental argument has been, for many of them, I just want to have a choice. I don't care if I'm paying more than I have to, however much. I want to be able to know that I can fire my hauler and get a different one. And if that really is truly the objection, the idea of having a second hauler would give people that choice. It would more or less throw out, I think, our number one goal of economics. It might address everything else to a large extent. It obviously wouldn't reduce the road impacts and pollution and fuel consumption and so forth as much as having 1 truck per route. But it would do a lot toward that compared to the people that say there are 6 trucks on my cul-de-sac. The big problem I see, though, is still on the pricing side, because, there are certainly cities now that have quote-unquote open hauling, that have 2 or 3 haulers licensed, and darned if they don't pay more than what people pay in cities that have more competition than that. And so we would be taking the word of the people that said, I just want to be able to fire my hauler and switch to another one, and taking that as a priority over everybody else who may potentially save hundreds of dollars a year and may instead get a price bump if we went to a system like that really did leave it as essentially the price is what you and your hauler negotiate kind of system.
Go ahead.
The problem with that, as I see it, is then in a certain area, when the 2 haulers that want that route, neither one of them's the one the people that live on 99999 First Street wanted. Excuse me. So then you're still back to, I want to choose my own.
Marv?
I got a question for Sean. Under the current system, how much more staff time would it take to enforce the current system, and how much would you have to raise the license fees to cover that cost?
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Copen, we did report on this with our trash hauling working group report, and so off the top of my head, for the licensing, we did specify that it would probably take 2 additional staff persons to review all the information required, perhaps an engineer to look at that route map, and myself to look at the rates and other requirements, the truck requirements, and then issue that to our business licensing clerk. So it would take additional staff to actually issue those licenses. And then the enforcement issue, we had discussed the possibility of actually bringing a license to the city council, which would take staff time. But I can't remember the exact amount of time, but it was... Anyone recall?
It was minimal. It was less than what I thought that it would actually take
But it's
to do
doable.
it. It is doable, but it was a significant amount of money that we were talking about.
Was it like 20,000?
I think 20,000, or the 15 to 20,000 was what we were figuring that to monitor the contract in an organized system, that would fall in that category. I believe that.
Also said that they were about.
Okay.
So, Mr. Mayor, in addition, we were determining that the license fee would have to be raised, and we did look at, currently we charge, I think it's $125, something to that effect, so it would be raised more along the lines of $700, which is in line with many of our adjacent cities that have open trash hauling.
Okay. So two things, I guess. If we were going to decide that we were going to just update our existing ordinance when we got to the 28th of November, is that about all the council would have to decide if we're going to go that route? If we were just say, you know what, we've decided we're just going to update the existing ordinance, we wouldn't have to have the ordinance all mapped out by that point, would we?
Mayor and council, under the process, at that point, you just send staff back, and we would, at some point when it's ready to go, bring that back before you. Probably a workshop to make sure everything that you wanted hit would get hit, and then at some future point after that, when it's, in its final form, it'd be before you as a ordinance change.
Okay. Kathy?
I guess I'm looking at because the focus tonight was for the improvements of the existing open system, and the offerings, if you will, from Mr. Berkopec and whoever else was involved in this, I may as well just be blunt, are disappointing. We've been hearing all online that we have things to offer and we can make this better. Well, where are they? I mean, we're trying to weigh 2 systems here, and we're trying to look at the open system, and we've been told, well, we have things that we could do. We could adjust this, and you would be happier, and blah, 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 blah. And we got 2 points? I mean, that's not we can't weigh these 2 at this point. What else are haulers willing and able to do of the kinds of things we've been having discussions up the yazoo. And they've certainly been public. And this is what we get. Well, I'm totally stymied as to how to work that out and think, well, yeah, because it is simpler and less of an impact to residents and everything if you could just improve your open hauling system. But we made it very clear some of the things that were our goals. I agree with Mr. Lannis. And these 2 points are weak at best at addressing basically 1.5 of the issues. So to say that I'm disappointed, I may as well, because I am. I was hoping to have something that we could actually weigh and discuss and look at. If we updated our ordinance and had kind of as formal a gentleman's agreement as you can get, we could have an improved open hauling. But these two puny little whatever they are aren't it. So I still don't know what the haulers we're hoping to do, offering to do, thinking they could do to improve our open system. So I'm just as in the dark about that as I was 3 months ago.
Well, not all that great a segue, but is there anybody out there that wants to comment on anything?
Good evening. I'm Mike Berkopek with the Minnesota chapter of the NSWMA, Mayor and council members. That was a great introduction, right?
Yeah.
I guess I just want to give you the kind of the broad brush of the couple of things that are out there, and obviously, as I've been up in front of you before, I'd be happy to take any questions that you have. The National Solid Waste Management Association Minnesota chapter represents some of the haulers in Maplewood. We don't represent all of the haulers, and I apologize if the thought was that we as an association was going to get this group of haulers together and try to work something out among them. That's not something that we've done as of this point, because again, they're not all part of our association, and to be quite candid, especially now where we're at in the process, I'm not sure where all the haulers are at. So the suggestions that we gave are some things that have happened in other cities and some things that I believe some of the haulers are committed to working on. Until the city says, hey, we would like for you to work on this stuff, and possibly says, okay, let's together and talk about it, and maybe they get some indication that it could happen, I'm not sure I can go any farther with the group at that point in time. But if you had mentioned November 28th, if something happens and you say, hey, you want to look at that more seriously, or you give that indication at some point in time, we'd like to make the attempt to make that better. A couple of points as relates to the specifics. First of all, as it relates to the enforcement, I recognize that there is a difference between enforcing a contract and an ordinance. And it's clear you cannot take everything in the contract and just throw it in an ordinance. But I do think that there's more that could be put in the ordinance, more enforcement, more clarity. For example, the one that we've talked about a lot is the rates. And what's the rates? What's the right thing? Well, first of all, we have to recognize, right, that good, bad, or indifferent, at least today, haulers have different rates, even within a particular area. I mean, you saw that. I mean, I can't, those are the facts. Some haulers have more variation in their rates than others. A popular thing is the introductory rates. When haulers submit licenses here in Maplewood, they're specifically told not to give their introductory rates. It's in the document. It says do not give introductory rates. So before we just suggest, the rate thing didn't work, I think the challenge is, and this is a two-part deal, I don't know that the haulers and the city worked hard enough to make sure that whatever was getting reported would be for the benefit of the residents. And I think that there's some opportunity there. I really, truly believe there's some opportunity there to make that better. On the same token, and Mayor Rosbach, you mentioned it, if the expectation is that everybody in the city is going to be charged the same rate from hauler to hauler or whatever, we start to get into this thing of rate regulation, which we tipped on a little bit earlier, excuse me, not earlier, in the previous meeting, which doesn't seem like that's a viable thing to talk about. So, I don't know that we're going to get into that specific, but trying to increase transparency is something that I think might be of benefit to the residents. There was some mention about recycling, and I think recycling and garbage are related. On the same token, in today's world especially, and definitely in my experience, recycling is all about convenience. And I think the city has made some strides to increase convenience with the single sort system, but you got a little ways to go there. And I think if you continue down that path, your recycling numbers are going to go up, regardless of what happens with garbage, because garbage, everybody has different impressions on what they want to do. So at the end of the day, I think the question is this freedom of choice thing that we've heard a lot of residents talk about, they have a value of, is trying to put a value on that based on a government-run system versus we'll call a market-driven system, and how deep both the city and residents want to get into as far as being consumers, being smart consumers, shopping, those types of things. So I can tell you that, at least from my perspective, personally, and as the chairman of the Minnesota Association, that if you decide to go down the ordinance path, one of the things that we won't do, and maybe that's where some of the disappointment is I don't want to be in a position where we say, okay, we got them off. We got them off that thing. I want to do things that I think are realistic and will work. But is that going to give you everything that you want in a contract? No. It can't do that. I think everybody knows that. It's just really a question for you, in my opinion, of what value you want to put on that freedom of choice thing that the residents have been talking about, and the ability to fire their hauler. And then obviously, for our members who are going to potentially lose some business, that's a significant hit when you've built a business and somebody comes in and changes the rules, and then you lose that business. That's a significant hit. And I think for anybody, if you were in that position, you can understand why you would fight to retain that business. So that's all I've got, but I'm also available if you had any questions, at least from the association's perspective.
Are any of the lights actually questions for him?
I just want a clarification, and it involves him.
Okay, and before you do that, I'm surprised in your choice of words when you said that the consumer wants the right to fire their hauler. I would think that you would say they would want the right to hire their hauler.
Well, mayor and council members, remember, right, it's a two-edged sword. Unless they fire them, they won't hire me.
Yeah, that's right.
And Tennis Sanitation actually has done an excellent job in Maplewood in finding people that wanted to hire him, and obviously they had to fire somebody to do that.
Kathy?
First of all, I know that you don't represent everyone, and so I was addressing people when I made my original comment. Outside of your organization, where have they been when we said we were looking to beef up our open system? So it wasn't just about you, it was about everybody, whether they belong to your organization or not. And I'm not, I totally understand why we are stuck on rates, but I don't understand why, when there was an agreement however many years ago to fill out once a year what your rate is, how hard is it to put what your rate is and then say offer introductory rate of blah? See, this gets to be a game of, okay, well, you asked for this much and I'm only going to give you this much. It's like, come on. If this was a cooperative effort, then that's what it should be. And so when we said, and I wasn't here then, we want you to submit rates once a year, submit your rates once a year. We shouldn't have to say, tut, get the trash cop out because they are not submitting their rates. This is like dealing with fourth graders on the playground. If you are serious about your business, why aren't the requirements just being taken care of? We wouldn't probably be having this conversation. So I was talking to everybody, not just you, and that kind of thing, it's already been expressed. We can put it in the ordinance, fine, whatever. But that type of thing and weight requirements and those things, if you say you're going to do them, then just freaking do them. It blows me away. I understand it's a business, I'm just looking for, how do we say that this is going to be better, staying in the same format, if we can't rely on people to be honest and do what they said that we're going to do?
So Kathy, we have 2 more people, and we're going to be done in
I'm done.
3 minutes. So.
I'm done, thanks.
Okay. Jim?
Just, I want to have an opportunity to clarify something that you said, because you said, we've heard from residents that are in opposition to a government-run system via free enterprise. And to be clear, this isn't a government-run system. I understand the effort to malign that in that fashion, because it's easier to prey on. I get it. I get the semantics of it. But really, this is a free enterprise piece. We went out for an RFP in a process that was by guideline for the best rates, including a number of other criteria. And there was somebody selected based on that criteria. That's free market, right? And so the government isn't running this. The government isn't running this. We sponsor an effort to provide better service and rates to our residents, and we come up with a plan, I think, that on a track that we're on. So it's easy to say it's a government, but really it isn't, and you know it isn't.
Mayor, council members, I strongly disagree, because the government is involved in this system much more than they were before. Government-provided carts, government rate regulation, and those types of things. Now, I will concede that it's a matter of words, but whether we call it a government-run system, a government-managed system, organized collection, but the government is much more involved than they were previously.
Is the government running it?
We'll concede that the government's much more involved. We're running out of time. So Mr. Lanas has a good point. Mike has a good point, too. John?
Yeah, and of course it's a matter of degree, because what we're talking about in changes to the current ordinance is a government-run system where we decide what the rules are that the haulers play by in the quote-unquote open system. I mean, there's no such thing as a completely free market. It's a myth, an abstract myth of economics classes, right? There are always regulations and rules and so forth. So to that point, I realize your position is not being able to speak exactly on behalf of all of the stakeholders on the hauler side in Maplewood, but I want to bounce a couple of things and be getting your reaction to them. One is on the topic of rate reporting. It seems to me the simple thing to do if we were to rewrite that part of the ordinance would be to say you must report your maximum rate. And so if you'd like, you can charge everybody $1 a month. But you cannot charge anyone more than that maximum rate, and the penalty would be if you did. If they came into City Hall and handed in the bill and said, look, they said my rate was 15 and I'm being charged 18, then by gosh, the city would say you're going to have to refund that overcharge, and we're going to bring you in for a hearing at the council and a penalty. So I think then if somebody wants to negotiate other things, that would be fine, but people would understand in looking at those sheets that would be the most that they would have to pay. So first of all, do you have any thought on that as an approach being problematic in any way?
Mayor and Councilmember Nephew, I think that definitely could work and something that haulers should be receptive to. And I think it recognizes, too, one of the challenges is the difference between 1996 and 2011. Definitely the way people are charging for things is different for whatever reason, and I think updating the ordinance to better reflect that would be a good idea.
Right, and if the haulers found that they needed to charge everybody more, then they just update the rates to the city and they're covered. It would just be a matter of keeping it in line.
Speak faster.
The next thing is we had some discussion about pay-as-you-throw, and you're probably not in a position to answer this, but I am curious about the notion that we could leapfrog ahead on pay-as-you-throw and truly volume-based pricing as a way to incentivize waste reduction through the open system faster than what we anticipate could be possible through an organized system. And so that really is a matter of what haulers have trucks that would be able to do that, what haulers have the capital resources to be able to do that. Is it something that would be possible under a licensing scheme to be requiring a truly volume-based, weight-based, household by household kind of thing, or is that just outside of the capital resources and the technology that's available to haulers today?
Mayor and Councilmember Nephew, I think that would be a challenging thing to go as far as maybe what you are thinking, and something that we would have to talk about a lot, and more than I think the mayor is going to give us today.
Well, think of that as something that folks can ponder and think about, since obviously at least we'll have another discussion on the 28th about what we're going to be doing.
Okay.
I'll leave it at that.
I didn't mean to necessarily monopolize all the time, if, I'll take one more comment for 30 seconds if somebody has one.
Mayor Council, Willie from Tennis Sanitation, and it's going to take more than 30 seconds, but...
Well, no, you only
Anyways.
get 30 seconds, so don't start unless you're going to be done in that amount of
Well,
time.
I'm going to try to short it down.
Okay.
As haulers, if we got down to 3 haulers and did modified the license fee, the monitoring of safety stuff, did some adjusting on the rates, things like that, would the council be open to listening to something like that?
I would say that the council has been looking forward to some kind of offer or thoughts being put to this by the haulers. And so if there are thoughts or plans churning in your heads, I would say you'd be foolish not to bring them before us.
All right, well, it's just popped in my brother's head last week, and so I got a list of things here to go over, but I can't go over them all in 30 seconds. But
Right.
the main thing is, if we, as haulers, could get down to 3 haulers, would that be something you think you'd consider keeping the open system?
I don't think that we're in a position where we're going to comment on that.
Oh, okay.
Although I
All
do
right.
know that we are looking for any proposals that you have, and we have staff that's around 20, not 24 hours a day, 7 days, no, not 7 days a week either. They're around during the work week, you know, the normal hours.
All right,
And so talk to them.
all right,
When they, yeah.
all right, so would Sean be a good one to talk to since?
Sean would be an excellent person to talk to.
All right,
Okay?
because I don't know Chuck that well, so I'll talk to him.
Yeah. You don't want to
All
either.
right. Thanks for your time.
All right, so we're going to have to wrap this up because we have a council meeting we have to do. And so it is 9:58. We're going to adjourn this meeting. It's 9:58. That's when we're going to be done with our council meeting. It is 6:58, and we are adjourned for this meeting. We'll start our council meeting at 10 after.